vast frontiers mankind has yet to conquer. So like Mark Watney says, we're in international waters. We're about to commandeer this vessel without permission. That makes us space pirates. What's up? Welcome back. Now, after a long time off, I think, we're going to get right back into painting. This is more of a terrain piece. So for our Traveler TTRPG campaign, we are space pirates. And of course, we need a ship for that. So now we got the Scout Carrier S-Type that we're after. And our GM was kind enough to purchase the STL for the actual ship. And then we got that printed in FDM. So now we got this giant ship. I decided to take on painting it, the majority of it. It came base painted and a little bit weathered, but I wanted to distress it a little bit more. So we'll go over some of the weathering techniques I used, the little details I painted on it, the oil painting and how I did that, some dry brushing I did, and then another technique you might not have used, melting FDM. So let's go ahead and get into it. Quick thing before we get into the nitty-gritty of the painting that I did on this thing. I want to shout out the website and the creators of the ship. Second Dynasty 3D is what they're called. And they make multiple ships for the 28mm size. And they also make these same ships small. So if you like play X-Wing or anything like that, you can print them off. You can see here they provide the schematics, the scale of this thing. They go into some of the add-ons that they have. Different landing gear types, different nose ends, different engine caps, different wing tips. It's pretty cool and very customizable. There's also pre-built inlets for LED light wiring and stuff like that, so you can lace this entire thing with LED lights. It's pretty sweet. Now, just in case anybody out there is actually playing Traveler, I do want to get into some of the different aspects of this kind of spaceship. So it's a Scout Courier S-Type. It's kind of small of a ship. You only really need a couple people to run the ship that are capable of it, but it's also fast. It's very maneuverable. This one in particular has some good radar and stuff since it's used for smuggling and other not so legal things. We have a double turret so we can put 2 weapons on there. We have thrust 2, jump 2, so we can jump further and move faster. Our maneuverability throughout the whole thing is just pretty good. It only requires a crew of 2, but we have a crew of 4, so it should be pretty interesting seeing how we run this actual thing during our campaign. Now, when I got this ship, there's a lot of doodads and knobbles and little balls and door handles and lights and stuff all over it, including on the back. And when I think of these things, I always feel like there's like reds and yellows and stuff for like the warning signs, like don't open this and be careful, be cautious. So I really wanted to make it feel like a real spaceship by adding those kinds of things. Later on, I do plan on adding LEDs. I don't know where I'm going to add them, but some of these may get drilled out later at a certain point to be replaced by LEDs. But for now, I went with the regular red hazards, yellow and white stripes to bring awareness to where the doors are and where you need to be when you're working or trying to enter the plane while you're in space. My main goal was to start with the landing gear. As of now, this thing is connected by open lock and it's wonky, so it kind of falls apart if it's not sitting right. And to paint it that way just really isn't that fun. Especially when I want to check it out and let it sit there, I like it to stand up straight. So the first thing I did was work on the landing gear. This came in just plain gray FDM plastic. I glued them together, spray painted them silver. I put some accents of gold on there just to break up that silver a little bit. And there's pistons on here that I painted white. And then I used the silver to go back over that and streak it down the pistons to make it look like wear and tear from, you know, moving up and down. Later on, I'm going to put some grease on there, some grease looking stuff, and then also some dry pigment powder on the bottom of these for the landing gear, just to make it look like it's sat on the ground, it's dirty, it's not very clean, stuff like that. Once I got finished with the landing gear, I decided to go ahead and start adding on where I wanted lights and stuff like that, and the little nodes and whatnot around the ship on the bottom, on the top. But I did mostly focus on the back and on the top because the bottom's not going to get seen that much. On the back here on the ship, there seems to be 4 different entrances. 2 are iris eye entrances, and the other 2 are, one seems to be like an airlock type, and the other one looks like a ramp that comes down. So that's usually something you use when you land. But these are the main places, the airlock and the ramp, that I wanted to put the red, you know, caution paint for people to know that these are areas that may be dangerous. Wrapping up this area up at the top, I decided to go with some thicker red and white stripes just to finish it off and make it nice, bright, and noticeable. Now, working on the other 2 doors and multiple lights, I decided to go with the yellow. That's typically what you see with caution. Like if you work in a warehouse or something like that, there's normally yellow striped lines. Areas are not supposed to walk. At least that's how it is where I work, in the production area. And oftentimes you'll see yellow on hazardous material. So I thought that yellow would be good for going around the doors to kind of provide some caution for someone trying to enter the doors or coming up to it in open space. Same for where next to the door you can see there's a little button pad. That I ended up doing yellow and red to really bring it out and make it noticeable for, you know, RP purposes, being able to see it well out in space. It's a pretty simple technique making these stripes. Basically, I base coated white, went back over, did some yellow lines, and then filled in those lines in between to make the hazard stripes a little bit thicker. And then I did 2 passes of those, which is good for being over a white base coat. I made sure that when I was doing the red, I was doing it over a white base coat also. Now this is the ramp-like door. It kind of just swings down onto the ground. Did a red outline, and then, sorry about the headshot there. Did the same striping technique, so I just did some red lines, and then eventually I fill those lines in. And when we're filling these in, we give these 2 coats also. Just check the opacity when you're going over these. If you can still see some white or it's kind of blotchy looking, just do another pass on them. After I was finished with the back, I went over to the top. So the top has 2 removable parts. One holds the turret and one is basically the entire ship up to the cockpit. And there's a bunch of little lights and stuff on there. What I did is I first painted them white, and then I went over them with just reds and yellows, and I think I threw a couple greens in there too, bright greens, just to break it up a little bit. And this part in particular, I don't know where I'm going to put LEDs as of yet. I have an idea, but it really depends on how the wires map out inside the ship. So some of these might actually get drilled out and go away. Overall, I use the basically the same technique: white base coat, overlay it with whatever color I'm going to use for the lights. Later on, the ones I don't put LEDs in, I'm actually going to use an airbrush to do some sort of OSL kind of look on the lights. So this part here, this silver part where you see me filing, this was actually part of my OCD with the ship. I had another section too, which I'll go over later. But there was some paint dried up and buildup from I don't know what. But it was making the top piece of the turret not sit flat. So I went in and I filed the crap out of it so it was flat, cleaned out the grooves there, and then the turret section sat flat. And then I went in knowing that it sat flat and repainted it silver to cover up that plastic. Some of the last things I did was just basic base coats on different parts of the ship. So my idea of the ship is that it's been around for a while. It's probably had a couple paint jobs, and I really wanted to break up the big slabs of tan. So on the bottom mostly, I threw in some big paneling pieces with the darker brown you see here. I also went in and did some work on the top piece, the turret piece, and I didn't really like how the rim was blending in with the rest of the ship, so I decided to go with some darker brown on that as well. And I did a couple layers on the silver of the turret just to get that opacity on there a little bit better. And what I'm doing with some of these colors is just breaking up the monotony of just the one tan color, because there's a lot of that color on here. So using these other colors like the brown here, or prior to me getting the ship, the green and the goldish red, those break up those colors and just make it a little bit more interesting. So if you're able to do that on a piece to break up the large swaths of a single color, do that. Now this part on the back, the bottom of the ship, I shouldn't say the back, was really fun. Tons of panels on here, and they've got these cool little fins down here, which ultimately I didn't do anything with but weather them. But there's these vents back here you can see. They're pretty large. I did some silver accents on there to make those stand out a little bit, but there's maybe they're open lock slots in the back there of those. Maybe something goes in there. I'm not totally sure. But I want to put LEDs in there so they shine out of those areas. I think that looks super cool. So those are definitely two of the places that I'm going to put some LEDs in. Now you can see here, putting this brown on here breaks up the tan, and then the silver also breaks up the tan as well. Before I went into doing a wash on this entire thing, I wanted to get these little gas tanks on the sides all painted up. It really makes it look cool when you take off the top and you got all these things painted up. But then I went in and cleaned up the edges and stuff like that where some of the colors overlapped and it made it a little bit ugly, or where there's some messy painting. And of course, when I asked my GM, what'd you use to paint these, what colors? Because I was trying to mix and get close, but they weren't getting quite there. He was using apple barrel, so of course I had to check my giant stash of apple barrel. So I was pretty sure I had the paints. And apple barrel is great, super cost effective. The paints that I have are probably coming on 5 years old, but these are the paints I started miniature painting with, and then they've since transitioned into just terrain paints at this point. But they're great paints to get into the hobby. Don't be afraid to use them. I mean, the coverage isn't great, and they need a little work to get them to a good point to actually paint with, unless if you don't care. But I would say pick some up, especially if you're doing terrain stuff, or you want to see what painting minis is like, or get into the hobby a little bit. The last thing I did before the wash was put these grimy strikes on here. So I'll go over that quick. Now what I did was basically dry brushing. I chose a brown paint, loaded up my paintbrush, like you can see here, and on every panel edge that I wanted the streak to be, I basically laid a big dab down and took a dry brush and swiped it up. And if I needed it to be a little bit stronger or deeper, I just put another stretch of paint up and I dry brushed it up, stroked it upwards, and that's what gave me these streaks of dirt, grime, and what looked like could be oil. Alright, this is the ship, and my OCD, you know, I could leave this as it is, it works just fine, but there's a gap. Unfortunately, it's worse on the other side. So, what I'm going to attempt to do is take my heat gun, slowly warm up the FDM PLA, and then clamp it down straight. Hopefully it holds and I don't ruin it, disconnect the glue, or make the paint bubble. So let's see what happens. So I put my heat gun on the highest heat, flipped it upside down to avoid the important parts of the paint, and just evenly heat it. You have to evenly heat it. If you blow it on one spot, it's going to melt it. And eventually it got really flexible. Now, I had to work fast because it would cool down and it would hold its position. I flipped it over quick, heated it up on the top just a little bit, and then I grabbed a couple towels so I didn't burn my hands, and I held it down as hard as I could for maybe a minute or two until it cooled down, and that did the trick. And when I decided to put a wash on this giant ship, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. I definitely didn't want to use a tiny bottle of wash that I have on my rack here. So I thought the next best option was probably oil paints. And I am not familiar with doing oil paint washes. Never done one before. The ship is actually the first one. Oil paints I usually paint on canvas, so this was new for me. And I ended up going with like a purplish tinge, red versus with black, to kind of get the look I have on the ship overall, to unify it. I think it turned out pretty good, but you let me know down in the comments what you think of the wash. Should I have used different colors? How do you really do that stuff? Never done it before, so if you got tips, let me know. Alright, so I am about to do a oil wash for the first time on my cruise ship, but there's a little problem I have. I didn't really know how the oil wash was going to react. Of course I put a varnish on, but I only had a matte varnish, which I know you're supposed to use gloss to really get it to run, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So, because I didn't really know how it was going to react, I took a small part of the ship, this little hood here. Now this sits over the cockpit, and I decided to do a test wash on that before I touched any other part of the ship. Now, eventually, I wiped this off maybe 10 minutes in, and it wiped off a little bit too much, so when I went to apply it to the main ship, I waited about 15, maybe 20 minutes before I started wiping stuff off. I started the wash on the top removable piece. Now, it looked very purple when I first put it on, so I a little bit freaked out, but I knew if I wiped it soon enough I could wipe most of it off. But I wanted to give it a chance, and I just started throwing this stuff on, and a few times going through this, I didn't mix the paint up well, so I still had some big globs of oil paint inside the liquid, the wash, and I would actually streak a big streak of like black or red across the ship, which in hindsight turned out to be fine because a wash shouldn't be perfect on a ship that's being used all the time. So it kind of just went with the theme of a very used ship, and overall it worked out pretty well. When I first started wiping down the washes, more on the top side than on the bottom, I kind of just dunked it in the mineral spirits and wiped it all off. When I went down to the bottom, and I later went back to the top to kind of redo it, I went panel by panel as much as I could to really keep that grime around the edges. I think overall it was a better look, and it really broke up the ship a lot as far as what shapes make up the bottom and the panels that are in there and stuff like that. It brought out more detail. Well, that's the last bit of progress I did before I decided to move to the inside of the ship. So let's go ahead and check out what it looks like. Well, that's it for this week. I'm going to keep working on this project. The next plan is to get the inside complete. That is like our bedrooms, the engine rooms, the cockpit, stuff like that. And then lay out where LEDs are going to be. I might get into like some Raspberry Pi stuff and program some of the lights, but I'm not sure. We'll see. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the ship. Do you play Traveler? What ship do you fly? Did I do a shitty job on painting? Let me know so I can get better. Anyway, if you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Most don't, only the real ones do. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Comment, like, share, you know the drill. Anyway, this has been Guys Night Gaming. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you play something soon. See ya.